Okay, so I'm going to try and be organised this time. So maybe we just quickly go along the panel and people introduce themselves so everybody knows who they are. So, Sue.
So I'm Sue Foster. I'm the Strategic Director of Neighbourhoods and Growth in Lambeth.
My name is Mauro Burgio. I'm an architecture director at Bryden Wood. We are an integrated design company. We don't like the term multidisciplinary. We are integrated more than anything else. We do work in modern methods of construction and design for manufacturing and assembly. We've been doing that for quite a few years now. So hopefully I'll talk about something of that.
My name is Steve Cole. I'm the head of strategy at Clarion Group, who are the UK's biggest housing association.
Hi, I'm Andrew Waugh from Waugh Thistleton Architects, and we principally research, design and build in mass timber.
Okay. Andrew, can I start with you? Because I just came across this incredible installation at the V&A that you've just done, and everybody has been to see it or knows about it. But you can tell us about it. I'm really bad with this screen. Can you get the multiply slide up for me? No. I'll leave it.
A bit smaller than that.
We'll come back to it.
I can see it in the window. Anyway. So we worked with the American Hardwood Council, who came to us in January and said we have some waste timber products that generally either get burnt or made into pallets or pulped into cardboard, low-grade hardwood timber from a tulip wood tree, and we'd like you to build an installation somewhere for the London Design Festival. So that conversation started in January, and in 4 weeks ago, we installed the first UK manufactured cross-laminated timber structure in the courtyard at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and then we flat packed it at the beginning of this week, and then we just reinstalled it yesterday at the NLA on Store Street, 3 floors high. So it was originally 17 boxes and 90 mil thick panels. So it was fun.
And this is a big vote for the future, isn't it? Because it's not carbon.
Exactly.
Producing.
I mean, even bringing the timber over from the US, the actual carbon stored within the timber of the structure was still greater than all the carbon emitted during the transportation and the production of the boxes. And I have to say, we had 6.5 million Instagram impressions and 105,000 people across the installation, and we surreptitiously put some information boards about the housing crisis and carbon capture and embodied carbon around the place as well.
But Andrew, it's so simple in a way, isn't it? This idea of sticking bits of hardwood together, and there we got our future and housing, no more problems. Is it that simple, and why haven't we thought about it before?
Well, we've been we've been talking about it for 15 years as a practice and kind of knocking on doors, and it's getting gradually easier. We have about 600 buildings in the UK made from cross-laminated timber. We're working with Swan, with Swan Housing, with Legal & General, with Vastin on prefabricated cross-laminated timber modular housing at the moment. And I think as yesterday's news from the IPCC kind of really begins to resonate, that we understand that over a third of greenhouse gas emissions in London come from construction and the materials that we use around construction. And so we're not going to save those by insulation or by triple glazing. We need to really think about the buildings that we build and how we build them. The buildings that we build are very, cost equivalent to concrete frame and steel buildings. They weigh a fifth of a concrete building, so talking about overstation development, actually look at timber and begin to think about how timber can solve that. And certainly we have 3 projects in Paris at the moment, including overstation developments as part of the Grand Paris Express route around Paris. So in Paris, they're now proposing that they actually give all cross-laminated timber buildings a given precedent over any other form of construction.
But sorry to come back to the heritage question, because I've got a bit of land down in Devon, and if I asked you to come and build a house for me, which I'd love to do, I bet I'd run into heritage problems, although interestingly the farmers next door were told, no, we're not allowed to build a Devon longhouse, which, you know, might have been part of the
This is really a different kind of, it's a different adventure in timber from that. I mean, this is about the urban housing crisis. This is about multi-story, multi-family developments and office developments. So I think that kind of, you know, timber frame and lightweight timber, etc., will always have its place, and green oak, etc. But this is a very different material and a very different process. So in terms of heritage and looking at heritage, I mean, you know, it's a whole different story.
Okay, and I know that you built that installation in the V&A in probably a confined space, so it's probably not how houses will look, but it looked quite twisty-turny and sort of almost medieval in a way.
It did. It kind of you know, it's one of those things where you build it at 1 to 100, and then you build it a month later at full scale, and it's kind of full of constant surprises. I think that one of the reasons why we articulated the boxes so much was just to kind of demonstrate that if you make something modular, if you prefabricate a building, that doesn't mean that that building can't be imaginative, can't have some architectural excitement and merit to it.
But do you have to build in quite small sort of rooms with this wood?
No.
It's just big or
So
small?
we recently built a factory, a manufacturing plant just outside Birmingham, where we have 25-metre spans on the beams, and the beams are the same size as they would have been in steel.
Okay, so I'm just going to go to Mauro because I just wanted you to give the picture for me. There's been a lot of talk about modular construction, and various people have set up factories. How far is it getting along though in the UK? Because we're often behind, aren't we?
So I'm picking up on what Andrew just said on the cross-laminated timber and the experience that they've been doing for quite a few years. That is an amazing project. That is an amazing route. I think it's not the only answer, as you Andrew would probably agree with me. Because answer for all the different type of projects that we're facing in this country and abroad must be on hybridization, must be on using different type of materials perform better on different forms and different uses in different parts of the structure. The problem, I think, is that we actually at the verge of a major shift in the construction industry, and I would add finally to that. Construction industry, as we all know, is the last major industry that has to go through a revolution. Is the last industry that has to go through a leap. All of the others have done that. Agriculture, to name one, has done that. We still building with the relative differences. We're still building like we used to do 2,000 years ago with brick and mortar. Now, it's still viable. I'm not suggesting we get rid of brick and mortar, but I think we should start thinking about how this little pocket of experience, like the one you mentioned, you know, the factory, the modular construction, the timber, cross-laminated timber, the hybridization, how can they all be combined together? How can we share the effort? All the different components, all the different parties in the construction industry, how can we share the effort? How can we make it work on a large scale? And it all goes through all the different stages. It all goes through the different parties. Clients need to understand what the radical shift is going to be. Designers have to embrace it, and contractors have to accept it and innovate it. And it all goes through, I think, the automation. It all goes through how can we make the designing process for architects and engineers and for designers in general more enjoyable. Stuart mentioned a few minutes ago, he mentioned how engineering is shaping space making, how engineering is over-constraining space making. Our goal, I think, is how can we make the construction so simple? How can we standardize and modularize, if you want, not necessarily on a volumetric scale, but on modules, on steels, on components that could be easily manufactured? How can we make that so easy to build that architects don't have to worry about producing information, but they can really worry about designing space for people and going back to what architecture really means, which is designing space for people and for people to live in.
I wanted to ask you, just moving away from housing a minute, to some of your hospital projects. I know that they are for the private sort of circle hospitals, but I mean, do you think that modular needs to be brought in for, to help hospital building for the NHS? I mean, is that a crazy idea? Would it help, or?
Absolutely not. I think the new ways I'm talking about, they could be easily applied to absolutely every sector. We, as Bryden Wood, the one of you know us, we don't specialize in any particular sector. You mentioned the healthcare. We do work with pharmaceutical companies. We do work, interesting enough, we share some other clients with Andrew, because there might be some enlightened clients that, some white flies that at the moment are the ones willing to explore these new opportunities. Going back to your question, I think is definitely an opportunity there to use more the methods of construction across all different sectors. With the government, at the moment we are developing a series of platforms. They're called. They are construction systems or solutions which include different materials and, again, hybrid solutions to cater for all different range and all different functions. The example you mentioned, Circle, is one of our clients, Seeker Health. We're building currently the second hospital. The one we finished a few years ago in Reading, it was 80% modular. And I'm not talking about necessarily volumes. I'm talking about planks and standardized size of columns and beams and concrete planks and so on and so forth. It was 28 or 30% cheaper than the building that was designed before. And at the same time, unfortunately, I haven't got any picture with me today, but at the same time, it develops exactly the same experience, if not, I would say better, but it'd be a bit selfish. A better experience for the patients, because, again, we could concentrate on how can we make the patient experience, how can we make a space for people. And the NHS, especially today with growth in this country, faces that particular issue. And again, one of the other things that was mentioned today was wayfinding, and we actually laughed about this morning when I couldn't find the entrance to this building. All of that is what architects and designers should really focus on, rather than thinking about, I would pose a challenge to all the designers here: how many parapet details we've designed in our career, how many windowsill details have we designed in our career. Really, is that really really where we are adding value as designers?
Okay, really interesting. So I'm going to move on just quickly to Sue, because Sue, you've handed over a huge amount of money to your private housing company, and I hear on the grapevine that you're not repairing homes, you're shutting them. You can disagree with me on all this, but this is what I read. Is it your intention to use modular construction to help with the housing crisis that you might face in your area?
Well, I better just correct what you've just said to start with. We have set up a 100% owned Lambeth housing company. It sits outside of the HRA, and it is there to deliver affordable homes. They will also build out market homes to cross-subsidise that. It is set up, and it is now gearing up to deliver about 300 homes a year, of which we would expect 50% of those to be affordable. Obviously, the news that the government is going to change the borrowing cap for the HRA this week is good news as well, because that means we and other local authorities can also now consider building within the HRA as well. But our priority is to deliver more homes, more affordable homes, more good quality homes for our residents, because our residents on low or medium income cannot afford now to live in Lambeth. And not only that, I have increasing numbers of people who are in temporary accommodation, and I need to also think about how can we make sure we can house those as many as possible within Lambeth as well. So for all those reasons, and for the reason that I have a very big £500 million capital programme for all my existing stock, which is coming close to an end, but that is making sure all my existing stock is decent. I need to look at ways to make sure we can deliver good quality homes, affordable homes, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And so one of the things we have been looking at is modular housing. We have a big programme for our estates, some of our estates, where we have very poor quality housing, replacing those. But also I have a small sites programme, and that's a series of small sites from, for 2 homes to 30 or 40 homes. And we've been using those sites to look at how we can experiment and potentially look at modular housing to as prototypes to see if we can scale those up. So we've done quite a lot with pocket housing on a series of sites, modular housing that's come forward. And we're also working with Atkins actually at the moment on a very small scheme, but that's 4 family homes. That is a flat pack scheme. But we're really keen to do more. And the area that we are focusing on right at this moment is for our temporary accommodation. And we're looking at how we can deliver modular housing, good quality modular housing that's flexible, that potentially can move from site to site, and that can provide housing for those in temporary accommodation.
Are you looking at modular housing in terms of that the landscape is going to last this time? Because obviously, sorry to go back to the Victorians, but they built to last. Then you've got all these 1960s tower blocks. They've all been largely a bit of a disaster. Is modular going to help with that longevity?
And I think that's why there's been some nervousness about, is modular housing a solution for the future? I agree it's not the only solution. It's only going to provide part of the answer. But I do think it is part of the answer. And I think, I think we've been in a phase of testing for quite some time. And I'm quite keen to see it beginning to scale up a bit. But certainly I would want to see products that are sustainable, have real sustainable credentials, provide good quality, flexible units that can be brought forward quickly, that are value for money, but that do last, 25 or 50 years, as well as potentially the opportunity to have a different product that gives me some short-term housing options on meanwhile spaces that we can house people on a temporary basis as well.
And sorry, Mauro, I'll come back to you, but just bringing Clarion Housing Group, because huge company, huge association, bringing in social housing. But it's Peabody, isn't it, that we look at, that have produced all these Victorian and beautifully built estates. And we admire that kind of architecture. Is modular going to do the same?
Good question. Well, I would actually challenge the Victorian engineering thing. Like, as a Glaswegian, I would say we've knocked down 60%. Glasgow's knocked down 60% of its Victorian stuff because it was terrible. It was jerry built. Like it's facade built stuff. Like it's damp, it's cold, it's impossible to heat, it's impossible to retrofit. Most of these properties were built with you stick up a facade and then you backfill in behind it, and that's similar in many buildings in London. And actually, if you compare, we spend roughly £1,000 a year maintaining a property, for example. How much homeowners in Victorian terraced houses? What's your average annual spend on roofs, boilers, windows? So it's also about the level of investment that people have put into these properties that are still standing. So I would challenge the joyous, perfect engineering of the Victorians. I think there's slum clearance in the 60s were a very real thing, and that was the same design archetypes entirely.
But what do your tenants say, though?
What do our tenants say?
Yeah, do you get this sort of Victorian campaign from them? Or?
Oh, well, so the interesting one, we have a site in Chelsea that is William Sutton Trust, is one of the heritage organisations from Clarion Group, very similar to the Peabody type stuff. It's literally, it fails every single habitation standard currently. We literally couldn't build it now. It's too small, it doesn't have separate bathrooms. We can make it meet decent homes by putting windows and doors and a new kitchen in there, but if we wanted to apply for planning permission for these properties, we couldn't get it built. So we're trying to regenerate them, but because they are of an aesthetic typology and they're in a certain part of Chelsea, there is a view that, well, you can't change those. Those look nice from the exterior. And I think that's a very real sort of issue when you come to regeneration and that sort of...
But I mean, did you see that fascinating programme about how Lewisham Council, in the, I think it was the 60s or 70s, they started to kind of bulldoze all these beautiful Victorian houses. And then they displaced the families and they put them in these sort of so-called modern, lovely bits. And they all got really depressed and sort of ended up suffering mental health issues.
Well, if you
It was
break
a
down-
really interesting programme.
If you're sort of conflating two issues, I guess. One is like regeneration done badly, where you displace people away from their communities, is a terrible idea. It doesn't work. That's not necessarily about the. And I think this is one of the interesting things with MMC. So I previously, before I was at Clarion Group, I was a lobbyist for quite a long time. And every time we got a new housing minister, which would be about every 3 months, they'd come in and go, I've seen this product. It's the magic bullet to solve the housing crisis. It's custom build, it's MMC, it's all of these different things. And the question is not what is the product, the question is what is the outcome, what are we trying to do with the housing crisis? And this is, I guess, how we're trying to approach it is, we are quite clear about why we exist. We've been around for 120 odd years in various shapes and forms, and we exist basically to house people who are failed by the market. Now, there's a nice facetious argument you can make that that's 99% of the population, because only super prime is where supply and demand meets. We basically exist to house poor people. Now, if we can provide more houses of a better quality for them with a different product, we'll do that. But at the moment, the problem we have is the whole housing association sector is re-gearing itself, and much like local authorities, changing how it operates. We used to previously mostly acquire housing through Section 106 agreements. We would buy it, we didn't have control over component parts, we didn't have control over that. So we are now changing to try and be more of a sort of land-led developer. And then it's a question of how much are we building that's affordable, and how much are we building that we can use to reinvest into our existing stock. So if we can have, and that has to be the priority for us, because that is the way that we help the most people with the housing crisis. It's not about what tool we use to do that. You know, I was the non-executive director for an off-site manufactured retrofit company for a number of years in the UK. That's a great tool for doing that. But for us, the priority is always about how you deliver that. And I think when you hold stock for a long time, I'm sure it's the same at the local authority, but the thing that our guys who manage the assets always complain about is, you know, MVHR, mechanical ventilation, all that. Those are the things that fall over. And there's an issue of just basic contractor quality. Like, a lot of great products out there, but the install of them is bad, and our ability to manage the install is bad. But the other thing is, because we're always trying to, make the best and most efficient use of our finances, because all the money we save allows us to house more people who otherwise could be street homeless or so on, is if you think about passive house, right, what people get with passive house is every time I've seen passive house, someone has come up to me and gone, we can do the same output as passive house, we'll do it half the price, no problem. You're like, yeah, but you're buying the bloody guarantee with passive house. That's what you're buying. It's not the component parts. And in the UK, I think the construction industry is still looking for, we can get around that in a different way. And that, I think, until we have that guarantee, but also until we have that understanding of why a guarantee is needed, I think a lot of organisations will struggle. And that's on both parties. That's about us as a client, and also about sort of the fact that also the UK construction industry supply chain is designed, the way you're engineering out risk is to be able to cut people out of the process as soon as possible. So you don't have an integrated supply chain, you have little accountability. If you have little accountability, innovation becomes harder, new products become harder, and that is a big structural issue, I think, with the entire operating environment in the MSC. So it's great that the housing minister turns up and goes, or GLA decide to call it precision engineering for some reason, but it's great that they have the stipulation of product, but you need the environment in which that product can be delivered.
Okay, Mauro, did you?
So there's so many things. Oh, I don't know how much time I got. So many things I want to pick up again. So just on last point you made. Yes, it's not the product. It's not the end product the solution. It's the process. The process is the solution. Every single project, every single sector, every single area potentially within the same sector, they have different outcomes. The real answer, I believe, or we believe, is how do we get there? How can we use all the information that we have nowadays? How can we use all the data that we have? How can we streamline the process? How can we level the bar? Why do we keep saying that there has to be an affordable housing and there has to be some other housing? Why can it be the same? Why can the manufacturer-led construction, why cannot produce always the same quality, always the same high-level quality standard components, which are always built the same way, that are manufactured in protected environments, they've got all the services already installed potentially, they get delivered all at once, and they perform exactly the same way every time, no matter where they put them, no matter for what ultimate customer you put them there. That's the goal. And let's face it, if we don't embrace this, we will never be able to A, afford, and B, have the time to build all these fantastic programs that we have. You know, Sue's program on council, HS2, and spacing through all the different sectors and all the different range of infrastructure that the government is proposing to build. We will never have the capacity to do that, because it still takes a very long time on site to build, and every site is about 35% efficient. If you compare it to 80-90% efficiency in a factory, there's something wrong in there, isn't it? I'm not suggesting we go to a factory in a site necessarily, but that might be an option. But there is a sweet spot in there, which is what we need to target. And again, I totally agree. We need to do it collectively. It's not the contractors only, it's not the designers only, it's not the clients only. We all need to be, and it's not the government or the councils only. It's everybody's responsibility. We need to sit down at the table and make a new way of working and define new languages that probably we don't even know.
Comments from Sue and Andrew on any of that?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, the situation we're in now, in terms of the need to really step up and build more homes in London, needs us to think differently. And this is all about us exploring how we can do things differently and bring more houses forward faster. But they've got to be good quality and they've got to fit within their context. And they've got to be things that are sustainable and low maintenance, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're experimenting with new types of housing and we find within 10 years we need to, that we need to replace them.
Absolutely. I think that one of the words that's coming out again and again about prefabrication is concerns around, or kind of old concerns around quality. And I think that I'd like to stress that the industrialization of the construction industry will drive quality forward. An analogy, a light analogy that we use in the office is if you bought a car and a couple of people turned up in boiler suits with a kind of box full of parts and started to erect it on your driveway, then you'd actually be very concerned about both the quality and the program. And yet in construction, we face a situation where, where both the farm report, the Egan report before it, nothing seems to be changing. We're still the least productive of all industries. Productivity in construction has gone down by 7% in the last 60 years, according to Turner's. I mean, this is a really a crazy industry based on craft, an industry, where when that industry is priced, you'll go to somebody and you'll ask them how much it cost, and they'll say to you, I'll probably get it wrong, so I need to charge you 20% more. I mean, that's just insane.
Okay, include the audience now. Matthew, do the honours with the microphone. Okay, question over there.
Hi, I'm Delia Bettis from Newbridge Advisors. I was just wondering how big the market is for people actually supplying off-site manufactured product. And the reason I ask is I think it's interesting when you see people like Swan and L&G who've really gone into it, they've set up their own factories. And I just wonder if that says something. And it's also just personal experience. We were working on a student accommodation project with it. They were looking to do as modular build to try and meet the university's time frame for September opening. And our client ended up looking at a Chinese provider and taking the risk on those units coming across the sea, which brought its own funding risks. And one of the challenges that funders often talk to us about is how do we get step-in rights here? Because we've got, one provider. What if that one provider goes down? And I think if you're the borrower and you say, well, take a charge over our entire factory, then that's probably one thing. But if you're just looking to find a provider, I'm just wondering how deep that market is to say, well, don't worry, if he goes down, we've got this business that she's running over there and she can step in.
No, the honest truth of it is that it's a market in its infancy, and that's the truth of it is. But I think the advantages are so overwhelming that it will be a market that grows incredibly quickly. And one of the actual real issues that we've had at both L&G and at Swan is the number of people who keep knocking on the door asking to look round the factory, and actually now what we're doing at Swan is we're saying you can only come every 2 months, and we're having open days every 2 months because it just got to be kind of crazy, the amount of people, the amount of interest that's being shown. So I think the enthusiasm and the excitement are there, and I think it's just going to take the encouragement of government, the encouragement of local authorities in order to provide proper contract for these companies in order to grow and to flourish.
I'd echo some of that. I think there's still some differentiation in the market as well. So the example of Pocket was used. Is there anyone here from Pocket?
Me.
Okay. I have some concerns about your unit size, shall we say? that would be my.
Come and have a look.
I know.
I did as well.
No,
I did as well. And we've built 2 buildings.
No,
for
not
Pocket.
about the quality, about
the size,
what it does to land values. Which is an interesting thing. I think it's an interesting thing. Not about the quality. I think quality can be done at that size.
Okay.
But if you in crude maths, if you make your units a third smaller and charge a third less for them and fit a third more of them onto the site, that is fine until the land value market decides to capture that, and then you have land value. So I think there's interesting things about what different disruptors in the market may do to the overall market. I think the point about someone base supporting the industry to start up is that was the job that would have been done previously by enterprise bodies in the 90s in the UK. When we ran the Energy Sprong programme in the Netherlands, we got it pump primed by the government for about €550 million. And another key element of that is they facilitated a 30-year framework contract between a number of providers and the providers of the product. So because one of the things with the LNG factory is also you need a steady supply stream to turn that on. If you go and talk to LNG, that's the big thing, is not having the factory, it's when is it financially viable long enough to turn that on. And it's a tricky issue for us because development is still opportunistic and tactical rather than strategic. Like land banks are as close as it gets to strategy in development, but basically it's about, can you do a deal, can you get the land, can you get the money right? And that doesn't fit as well with the long-term strategic output that you're looking for from a factory. Yeah. And the big comparison with the automotive industry is the automotive industry doesn't fluctuate in the way the housing industry does. They have mechanisms and controls and ways of scaling down their plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons why the factories work well for both those for both those companies is that because they are developers, builders themselves, and also I think it also demonstrates how great the need is, and how great the savings are as well.
They have a different process altogether. They are not scared at all of prototyping, as you know. They do prototype. They build something knowing that thing they're building is going to fail. But this is what they're looking for. They look for that because then they can improve from that and they can learn and they can...
They're looking for it to fail.
Well, no, okay. Not necessarily looking for it to fail, but, they are prepared for it to fail. And the question that you asked is actually quite interesting. The fact that you had to go, or your client had to go to a Chinese market, it tells itself the fact that the market is not deep enough. We're working with the MTC, with Manufacturing and Technology Centre, to streamline the production of these components that can make a building. And the whole idea behind it is how can a building be made out of components so simple that could be put together by us with no construction skills, with no skills at all. And that's where the market needs to go. This is where the new jobs are going to be found. This is how we can make our industry appealing for the new generations. If you look at some of the Minecraft master plans, they are mind-blowing, absolutely incredible, and they are made by kids. You know, they collaborate, they share their knowledge. They're not worried about, again, trying, testing, failing, and using all the data they have at their disposal. And that's the key, I think. That's where we should look at.
Mauro, I'm going to take one question more because probably people are starving hungry and it probably is lunchtime by now. So sandwiches and coffee out there in a minute. But
Who do you want?
who hasn't spoken? Should we give somebody a chance to... Sorry.
Oxford Brookes Professor.
Hello, Nick Whitehouse, Oxford Brookes, and also build Offsite, and also had some of the major manufacturing facilities, and an architect and a career in Offsite. So a few asides. I love the conversation. It's all really good stuff. The first thing is scale is key to this sector, and that's been brought up. We mustn't forget that the sector behaves as 4 separate supply chains and activities. So some parts suit Offsite better than other. The private house builder, the client, the end user client, has very little say. I will say no more to that, except that the major house builders are now investing in looking at Offsite with research and so on and so forth. So they're starting to move or position themselves ready to move. The other thing is that I like to use a little expression that what it should be all about is standard process and specification, flexible end product. And that's a nice little summary. And then a little aside, we were concerned about scale and dependability and robustness and so on and so forth. There's a thing called BOPAS, Build Offsite Property Assurance Scheme, which has been around for some time, been involved with it, with Lloyds and Allianz, BLP, etc. It's taken a long time to get established, but there's been an exponential growth in the last couple of years. There are about 35 registered companies now that have been through the BOPAS process that assures product and process to the end user. So we're starting to get a bit of traction in terms of predictability and scale. I think that's probably enough on this.
Okay, Andrew,
Thank you.
react and sum up what we've talked about on the panel, and finally tell us your construction, your installation, does it go on tour or is it...
It does go on tour. It goes to, it's going to New York, and then to Madrid, and then to Milan.
Amazing. So can you just react and sum up what we've discussed today?
One sentence.
The soundbite.
I think that it's an incredibly exciting time. I think that things are changing by necessity. We are faced with 2 of the most major crises that we've faced since the last war, really, in terms of the housing crisis, in terms of climate change. And I think that these need to be grappled with together. They need to be problems that are approached at the same time. We need a workforce in construction which is industrialized, which is a diverse workforce, and we need to do it soon. So I would say that. I mean, say we all need to be part of the solution and not part of the problems that we have.
Thank you so much.